So I just wanted to share an idea I had to maybe quantify some of the things we're seeing on the MRI images of Alex's lesion. I'm obviously not an expert at looking at this, and as I've learned to look at these MRI images, I certainly appreciate how difficult it is for the radiologist to make a judgment on any change in size of this lesion. But as I thought about it, I wondered maybe the better way to look at it might be to plot on, different cross-sectional areas of the spinal cord, down the length of the spinal cord, and then monitor that over time, and that may give some indication if there's any changes happening. You can see with the software I have, this is Horos that's viewing the MRI images, and you can see where you can just trace the cross-sectional area, and I intentionally traced around the anterior fissure. Alex explained to me what's going on there. But you can see it's pretty easy to see where the edge is, and then I can do that down with all the images in the sequence and plot that. I do recognize that all these MRI series from the different months, many of them are done on different MRI machines with different protocols. Some of the machines had a magnetic power 1.5 Tesla, other were 3. So the differences that we'll see in these, it's hard to say whether is it real or is it due to, just differences in these machines and the protocol. I think the other thing to recognize is that the slice that these cross sections are taken is not always normal to the plane of the spinal cord. So that can also lead to some distortion. And so I did do a little trigonometry to make a correction there. Pretty straightforward, but I will explain that. So the first thing I did is, the white squares, I just created this mask to overlap the center line of the different vertebrae so that I could take each of the different sequence and rotate the images to lay in that same mask. So there's one of the months, for example, and here's another one where you can see I've got it lined up with the mask. And this one you can see I had to rotate to get it to fit. And then the other thing I did was created the red center line of the spinal cord. That way I could compare that to the green line, which represents where the image slice for the axial view comes from, and then looking at that angle all the way down the length of all these images, and then I can do the correction to the area. So just to see that in my Excel file, by keeping track of that X distance for all of the different sequences, and then what was that angle difference from the cross-sectional slice to normal. It's different on each one just because it was set up a little different on every MRI scan. And then it turns out to be pretty straightforward. Again, it's just taking the cosine of that angle and multiplying it by the cross-sectional area, and then that corrects the area measurement to be from a normal, square cut across the spinal cord. So with that, here is the, let me explain what I did for the 0, because obviously the distances come, from within the MRI images, and I normalized 0 on all of them to this point I'm pointing at on the screen as part of C2. And I made sure the projection to where we're actually measuring the spinal cord was the same in all the images due to that rotation. So with that, going back to the data, so here's the chart where we have the 4 different sequences that Alex had measured. There are other ones. There should be an October one that we didn't actually get the images on the disk. It was just referencing some on the Penn server. So we'll have to get that one and add it to this series. And I'll explain what this green line is in a little bit. But what's interesting to note here is, first let me explain. The x-axis is the distance down the spinal cord in millimeters. And I've marked the vertebrae C2 to T1 in each of those sections. And then the y-axis is the cross-sectional area. And, what's interesting to note here is April was some of the lowest points, especially in the C3, C4 region. And this does match Alex's feeling. And if you look at August was, some of her worst deficits in terms of hand strength and functionality. And then her most recent scan in January shows closer to the April curve, which does match what Alex is feeling in terms of strength and function in her hand. So hopefully that means this data is real, but again, recognizing it could just be artifact from the protocols and the machines. And I will say that up in the C5, C6 area, it was much harder to differentiate the images and draw around the spinal cord. But in the C3, C4 area, it's pretty straightforward, just like the image we're seeing here off to the right. And I also had a slide just to take, hey, it looks like we should be able to see these differences in this C3, C4 area. So I created a slide looking at, here's the C3, C4 area. Actually, each one of these images are within a millimeter of each other down that spinal cord. They're all scaled the same, and the red boxes are the same in each of the images. So you can compare, looking at the April image, the spinal cord fit completely inside the small red box. In June and August, it's clearly outside the red box, and then by January, it's much closer to being inside of it. So again, hopefully that's real and not an artifact, but this is just basically, this is where the data comes from that chart. And then the green line on that chart, I was interested in seeing, what would a normal spinal cord look like on this chart, and that data was available. There was several studies I found, but there was one from NIH done in 2021, and it was actually looking at MS patients, but they had 48 healthy controls in the study, and this chart is basically the same chart I showed that I put together, which is downstream distance of the spinal cord and the cross-sectional area. So I just picked off the data from the healthy controls and then added that as the green line in the chart for Alex. So when you look at that data, you could make the argument that, the area between the green line and any of the curves from Alex's lesion could represent the tumor volume. And so hopefully over time we'll see that continue to decrease and hopefully match up with that green line eventually. So anyhow, again, hopefully this is real. Just wanted to share it. Not necessarily actionable, but it's nice to see that it matches up with how Alex has been feeling and maybe a way to track progress over time. So thank you.